Madison's very own homegrown Bob Spindell.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Bob Spindell, and while I am currently a Wisconsin Election Commission commissioner, I'm speaking for myself and not for the commission. I'm also chairman of the Republican Party Wisconsin 4th Congressional District. That's the Milwaukee area. And I'm going to tell you today some of the items, irregularities, fraud, Democratic tricks which caused the President Trump to lose Wisconsin at this point, by only about 20,000 votes. Now, I'm originally from Chicago. Mayor Daley, ever hear Mayor Daley? Mayor Daley, Chicago. And my first major paper in high school was on the alleged Chicago vote frauds of 1960. And if you remember back then, there was no question about it. Mayor Daley stole the election from Richard Nixon by 9,000 votes in Illinois. That made the difference in terms of who actually was elected president of the United States. So we know that this fraud has been taking place in Chicago, and most likely we have to make sure that we cannot let this happen again in 2020. And I've been studying election fraud for over 50 years, and since then, in every election, we continue to have various levels of vote fraud. From the extensive cases the Trump campaign is putting together, thousands of affidavits describing the irregularities and the blatant fraud that security cameras have captured on video. You can't deny it. It appears that certainly we have fraud all over the country in the 2020 election, especially in swing states. Now, the Democrats before this election and their willing media says there is no evidence of vote fraud. How many times have you heard there is no evidence of vote fraud? And the social media will actually censor you and keep you from talking if you mention the word fraud. Not one eensy-beensy, tiny-weensy bit of voter fraud in the entire United States of America. Whether it be in Philadelphia, where vote fraud has been going on for well over 100 years. What about New York? What about Chicago? What about Detroit? And what about Madison, Wisconsin? In every other aspect of human life, we know that people lie, cheat, and steal. Are we supposed to believe really that there is nothing, there is no vote fraud? In something as intense as this election, where the Democratic leaders allow, it's okay, to burn down parts of cities. It's okay for looting and stealing. And how about here in Madison, where they allowed State Street to be destroyed? And still, take a look at State Street to be destroyed. They would never think the Democrats would never think to steal a vote. As many that they may need to win, especially their overwhelming intensity to get rid of Trump, and you know what their intensity was. No, the Democrats and media tell us there is no evidence of vote fraud. Well, there's no evidence that vote fraud did not occur. What about the red light that some of you may have gone through today? By mistake, of course, but is there any evidence that you went through a red light? No. Unless there's a camera, of course. And we have some cameras, don't we, that's showing some of this. I learned from a police detective a long time ago that was investigating vote fraud in Milwaukee in 2008, and he actually published a document that did and confirmed that was actually included in John Funt's book about vote fraud. And what he said is two things. You got to have a level of chaos, which this election certainly did. Then everything takes care of itself by people finding ways to get those extra votes. Or for larger organizations, you actually need to have an informant in the organization to plan and carry out the fraud. But, once the ballot goes into the machine, it's much more difficult. For example, just to check out one complaint of one voter maybe committing fraud, could take an investigator or a team of investigators a half a day to a day. So in the past, there hasn't been the will nor the resources to go after it. And so that's something that if they do catch somebody, they're never prosecuted. So you can say, you know, fraud is, well, you're gonna have a felony. Well, nobody ever gets prosecuted, and you don't get prosecuted unless you really admit to it. Say, well, I just didn't know. And once you say, I just didn't know, then everything seems to be okay. But that's right. But what happened in Wisconsin? Remember, we're only 20,000 votes short. We're not 200,000 votes short. We're 20,000 votes short. That's all we're talking today. And 3 words, what caused it, is mail-in voting. And so months before the election, 9 months before the election, and throughout the country, we know the Democrats here in Wisconsin did everything possible to change the election laws. For example, more than a dozen lawsuits in Wisconsin. What's the reason? The pandemic. The most famous of these cases was the Democratic National Committee, Democratic Party of Wisconsin, against the Election Commission. There were over 40,000 pages in this lawsuit, 650 plus filings, 20 plus depositions with at least 15 lawyers listening into each one, at least $1 million plus in legal fees. And this was an attempt to try and get a federal judge, which they were successful in doing in Wisconsin, to change all sorts of dates and things along this line for the April election. We're going back to the April election. They tried the same thing for November, but fortunately the appeals court and then the Supreme Court stayed. That meant they wouldn't let his ruling go into effect. So fortunately that happened for us. But what I like to do, that's one thing. I like to go through several items that that maybe made up the 20,000 votes. One is July of 2019, a list that has been proven to be 95% accurate, indicating that 230,000 voters have moved or died or whatever. The Wisconsin Election Commission and the commission staff decided, well, let's keep all 230,000 until April of 2021. You know, we're in 2020 now. This is 2021. And since that time, there's still 130,000 approximately that we have no idea what's happened to them. And that's because the commission has split 3-3 recently, and also 2 bad Supreme Court decisions, split the Supreme Court decisions, that will not allow us to get these people off the voting rolls. But we'll determine how many of these people actually voted by mail or otherwise as we move forward. Number 3, the Wisconsin Election Commission sent out $2.7 million absentee ballot applications. I understand tens of thousands of envelopes of ones with no address, no such address, and so forth moved, have come back, and no accountability prior to the election, but theoretically we will be looking at that as we move forward. Number 3, the Green Party, with its perfect, I've never seen such perfect nomination papers that they had, was given incomplete and inaccurate information by the Wisconsin election staff, and then the 3 Dem commissioners, with a 4-3 again Supreme Court decision, kept them off the ballot. The dissenting opinions called this criminal, that the Wisconsin Election Commission did not do that. That's right. So what would have been, that would have been 10,000, 15 votes. That's right. These are some of the items. And how about Kenyon West? About that situation where somebody was trying to get in the building to file papers and then they did not do it. Hey, how are you? So.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal! Stop the steal!
About 5 minutes.
Stop the steal! 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 Stop the steal!
Okay, what I want to do, I've been told I got to cut my comments short, so I'm just going to mention the other several items without getting into it in terms of what happened. How about the how about the indefinitely confirmed? That's one of the things in the lawsuit right now, and the situation there was that there was approximately 6,000 in the city of Milwaukee, 70,000. Now it's up to 214,000. And what caused that? The Dane County, Milwaukee County clerk said, hey, that's just fine. And so the Election Commission did not provide the guidance adequately to do that. So what about 4 years ago in terms of the Election Commission said, you know, you must fill in the names and the address for the witnesses to an absentee ballot. So what happened in Milwaukee, elsewhere during the recount before that, the clerks filled in the address. The legislation said no address, no count. Where did the drop boxes come from? On election day in Milwaukee, and the polling places were reduced from 180 to 5. How can we trust Milwaukee? So I guess let me just finish up one thing right here. We're getting at the bottom line. To account for this okay, that's right. So let's take a look at this again. You can easily see by these 12 irregularities, bad action on the Wisconsin Election Commission, or other actions, not to mention the unseen activities that could take place with all the 2 million plus absentee ballots. The 20,000 votes was not hard to count for in this election. No matter how this comes out, we now have the will, we have the resources to track down and uncover some of these many problems, these irregularities, the possible fraud that might have cost Trump in the election. We need to have that through. Okay, so I've got to end right now. But again, the situation in Milwaukee is such that we can still win this election. So, but we got to be careful as we move along. We got to be able to discern this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Spindell. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have somebody with us today that has